Welcome back. This is Module 1.3.2. We're going to discuss ecosystems. Ecosystems are an important unit of ecological study. They consist of two basic components. First, they consist of the abiotic component. Abiotic, if you look at the etymology of the word, you can see bio means life and a means not. So these are not living or non-living components. If you had to think, what would some of the non-living components of an ecosystem be? You'd probably come up with a list which would include things such as, do you have your list? Water, air, soil, nutrients, light, topography, climate, even disturbance, how frequently a major storm like a hurricane comes through and knocks trees down, or fire frequency. These are all important abiotic components of ecosystems. The second major components of ecosystems are the biotic components. These are the living components, and these include things such as plants, animals, fungi, and microbes. Microbes would include bacteria, protists, single-celled fungi, things like that. We can further classify biotic components by the role that they play as producer, consumer, or decomposer, and we'll see more about that in a moment. But here we can look at the four major components of ecosystems. First, abiotic factors. This is an aquatic ecosystem, and you can see here the surface of a slow-moving river. Producers are a second major component. Here I'm showing macroscopic plants that are showing emergent plants, but also there would be producers which are unicellular algae floating in the water. A third component here are consumers. In this case, we have a consumer, a big consumer, a hippopotamus, but there we could have small consumers such as insects as well. Many others. The fourth and final category or component of ecosystems are decomposers. And decomposers we'll get to later, but this includes things like bacteria and fungi. So you can see that we can show the two major divisions: abiotic factors, water, sunlight, temperature, climate, and then the biotic factors, the producers, consumers, and decomposers all together. Now, remember the four components of ecosystems, and it is as easy as A, P, C, D. A for abiotic factors, P for producers, C for consumers, D for decomposers. So do make it a point to remember that. And these are the same components drawn in a different way. You should be able to make such a drawing. You should be able to note that the biotic factors are up here. The abiotic factors support the producers. The producers support the consumers, including the decomposers. Decomposers are a subtype of consumer. You should be able to draw this and to explain it quite well. We're going to now look at each of these different factors in turn, really the biotic factors in turn. First we're going to look at, abiotic factors underlie them, but first we're going to look at producers, then we're going to see consumers and decomposers. So first, producers. Producers, as their name implies, produce food. Understand that food from a biological perspective are complex biological macromolecules, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Now, producers are able to make food from simple inorganic molecules such as water and air. This is something that animals, including humans, cannot do. Producers are all autotrophs. The word auto means self. Troph means feeding. They make their own food from these simple materials in the environment. Examples of producers: green plants on land, algae in water. Photoautotrophs use the process of photosynthesis, and they use sunlight and they produce complex carbohydrates. Here's some pictures on the upper left here. These are some microscopic algae. Here we see a rainforest, and down at the bottom right we see some diatoms, more microscopic algae. In aquatic ecosystems, the algae are critical. Of course, humans being terrestrial creatures, we tend to think of producers as being green plants. There's nothing wrong with that, as that is the correct association. Second category of biotic, second category in the biotic category are consumers. These are organisms, animals that get energy and nutrients by feeding on other organisms. They're not exclusively animals, but many of them are, in fact, animals. Consumers are heterotrophs. Hetero means other, troph means feeding. These are other feeders. Heterotrophs are unable to make complex biological macromolecules from simple inorganic molecules in the environment, so they must go and forage for these things. They go and forage for food. When you get hungry, you don't just stand in the sun, you go and look for some food, and that's what all heterotrophs have to do. Here's our heterotroph. I'm not even sure what that creature is supposed to be. He looks like a bear, but he has teeth like a rodent. But he's clearly eating that plant, which is a producer. The next category, well, actually, here's a homage to heterotrophs and to consumers in general. You can see that around the periphery, there's some Labradors, some Paramecium. There's a roadrunner. Here's a kookaburra, which is a kingfisher from Australia. Here's a wolf on a dead elk with ravens. In the lower right, there's a number of fungi. And here we have in the center a panel which changes to a variety of different consumers throughout. We can also further categorize consumers. Herbivores are consumers that eat plants. Carnivores are consumers that eat meat. Carne means flesh or meat. Chili con carne is a word you might be familiar with, help you to make that association. Omnivores, these are consumers that eat both plants and meat. Omna means all, and vor means eating, so all eating. Here's some examples. In the upper left, we see a gray fox, which is an omnivore. Then we see some cows, which are herbivores. Many people would not know that pack rats are omnivores, but they will eat meat as well as plants. Cats are really, the whole cat family is pretty dedicated carnivores. And of course, primates, the group to which we belong, they are omnivores. And here we can see in the lower right the little chimpanzee contemplating, should he have steak or veggies? My advice is have both. Why not? Before we leave this module, I do want to address decomposers. Decomposers are also consumers. They're a specialized subtype of consumer, and they have a special role in which they recycle biotic matter in ecosystems. When we use the term biotic matter, what we mean is molecules that are in the bodies of living organisms. Sometimes scavengers are even included in this category of decomposer. But mostly when we say decomposer, we're thinking of the FBI, not that FBI, but fungi, bacteria, and insects are some of the major decomposers. Not all insects are decomposers, but they do help fulfill this role, and they are quite ubiquitous. I do want to share with you this concept, this idea of how these different categories of the biotic components of ecosystems fit together. And I want to do this by this quote. This quotation, all flesh is grass, actually appears in the Old Testament of the Bible. But if you think about what that says, all flesh is grass, think of it in terms of a deer eating grass and a mountain lion eating a deer. Well, what the deer has actually eaten is energy that plants captured from the sun by photosynthesis, and the deer's body transformed the plant's body into a deer. And then the mountain lion, of course, consumes the deer, which is grass, which is plants. And so we can see that relationship. And so really what we're getting at here is that heterotrophs are dependent on photosynthesis for their nutrition, primarily, either directly or indirectly. And so this is going to conclude our second module on ecology, and we'll be back with the third module later.